All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking the time and energy to come. I arrived in the room about 30 minutes ago, and there were 4 people in here, and I wondered how many more people would join, and I'm pretty thrilled that we've got an almost full room. So I really appreciate you coming to this session. So let's get started and talk about transforming communications with AI. My name is Steve Clayton. I lead a group at Microsoft called the Communications Strategy Team, and that group was formed about 9 months ago, basically because I said to my boss, this AI stuff is really exciting and I want to work on it. I was doing something quite different at the time. I was leading our public affairs organization inside of Microsoft, working on policy and regulation and a little bit of AI, but I could see that this technology, generative AI in particular, was going to change the landscape of communications. And so I put my hand up and I said, let's figure out how it's going to change the landscape of communications inside of Microsoft. I'm not going to dwell too much on this, but this is a little bit of background on me. Born in Liverpool, England, home to the world's greatest football team, who are not doing quite so well over the last few weeks. Thank you. Didn't study communications, actually. I studied technology at a university in England called Loughborough, which in America is known as Luga Baruga. And that is, in fact, my only joke of this entire hour session. So a couple of people laughed. But I joined the company about 26 years ago in the UK, and I've spent half of my career working in the UK on technologies like SharePoint with Jeff Teeper 24 years ago when that product first came out. I was one of Jeff's systems engineers in the field helping to sell that product to customers. And I moved to our headquarters in Seattle about 14 years ago to take on a role that has broadly been around communications, lots of different types of communications, internal communications, external communications, exec communications, CEO communications, CEO demos, all kinds of fun stuff. I also like to say that I'm a recruitment excellent at the company, which I'm not going to bore you with that story now, but if we do have time at the end, which I think we will for questions, and we run out of questions, you can ask me how I actually got recruited to the company, and it was a complete accident. But we're going to move on, or in fact, move back just a little bit, about 16 months ago to the arrival of ChatGPT, November 30th, 2022. Show of hands, who in the room on that day remembers using ChatGPT on the day it came out, or maybe in the first week or so? A few people. I definitely remember it. At the time, as I said earlier, I was leading a group called Public Affairs that runs all of our policy communications work at Microsoft. And I was working for a gentleman called Brad Smith that some of you may be familiar with. Brad is our president and vice chairman of the company. And so I worked on lots of communication for Brad at the time. And so this is literally the first thing that I typed into ChatGPT on the day it came out. I was interested to see whether it could write an introduction about Brad Smith of Microsoft ahead of a commencement speech he was about to give and include reference to his book, Tools and Weapons. And I typed it into the text box, and I sat there with some trepidation, and I thought, what's going to happen next? And this is what happened next. And it came back with something that, as I read it, I could feel the hairs going up on the back of my neck. I could feel the sweat beads starting to form on my forehead because it's really good. And I think we all had this experience where you type something into ChatGPT in the first few days, and if you're in the business of communications, you looked at it and you probably said the exact same thing that I did. Oh shit. This is quite good. And I thought, well, maybe it just got lucky. So maybe we'll try something else. How about translate this into French? Anybody in the room speak French, by the way? A couple of people. This gentleman here. So you'll have to let me know whether this is a good translation in French. But I asked some friends in Paris recently when I presented this, and they said it was a pretty good translation. I think it's a brilliant translation because I don't speak French at all. So then I said, well, maybe I got lucky twice. So let's try a third thing. A note that I'm not having to ask it to do this, to repeat what the original task was. It's remembering the context of the information here. So I said, okay, how about turn this into a poem? And I can assure you that I am definitely not a poet. And this is what it did. In a world of circuit code and screens, a man emerges, wise it seems. Ladies, gents, lend me your ear, for Brad Smith is finally here. And that's the point when I thought I'm not going to finally be here, because this thing is really, really good at writing communications. And so then the next day, this occurred. I stepped outside of my house, and this is literally a photograph of the postbox outside of the front door of my house. And I went to the post box and I took out the mail, sorted through the mail, walked back into the house, and one of the items in the post box on that day was this, an invitation to join the US Postal Service. And at that point, I thought there was some message from God that was telling me, it's time for a new career in communications, Steve. A slightly different communications career. You're about to be a post deliverer, a postman, a mail carrier. And so that, I think, is the experience a lot of us went through in the first days of seeing ChatGPT when it came out. For those of us in communications, we sort of looked at it with a little bit of awe, a little bit of wonder, and quite a bit of trepidation, and thought, what does this mean for our profession? What does this mean for our discipline? And then over the next few months, February of last year, Microsoft introduced this idea of Copilot. But not just the product, the idea of Copilot. This notion that this technology is not an autopilot. It's not actually here to replace us. It's here to be a Copilot. And we believed so much in that earlier this year, we ran a commercial at the Super Bowl here in the United States, which is a big game where they throw a ball, and they call it football, but they throw the ball. But anyway, it's called the Super Bowl. And I'm going to play you that ad.
Good morning.
Watch me.
Just watch me now. Just watch me now. I got something for you, a little more for you. You won't believe your eyes. Just watch me now. I got something for you, a little more for you. You won't believe your eyes. Just watch me now. Just watch me now.
If you do one thing when you leave this room, if you haven't installed it, install the Copilot app on your phone. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on what the capabilities of that app are. But if you haven't installed it, please go and install it. It's available in the app stores for Android and iPhone, freely available. So go and grab it. But I want to switch gears now a little and talk about how have we inside of the Microsoft Communications team, which is a global team of about 250 communications professionals across all different disciplines, across public relations, across crisis communications, issues management, employee communications, all types of different communications. How have we been approaching this last 9 months and thinking about how do we bring generative AI into our business? And this slide tries to capture the framework that we're using for this approach. The top part of the slide is about how do we embrace Copilot as a research assistant inside of Edge, and I'll show you that in a moment. How do we make it part of our daily work? And then how do we embrace Copilot in M365 across all of the products that you've seen this morning and we'll see during the conference here, whether that's Word, PowerPoint, Teams, Outlook, OneNote, SharePoint, Excel, all of those products. How do we make that part of our daily workflow? And so the top part of this slide, whilst it talks about technology, most of our efforts here are really around how do we get people to just change their patterns of work? How do we get people to say, hey, I'm just going to start to use Copilot a little bit more inside of Teams this week. Or I'm going to start to use Copilot inside of OneNote this week. So really, lots of our energy on the top part of this slide is not really about the products because the capability is now in the product and we all have it. It's about how do we get people to change these patterns of behavior, and I'll give you an example of that in a second. On the bottom part of the slide are two projects that we have going on within my team. One is around how do we rethink the business of measurement. If you're in communications, you are almost certainly in the business of measurement, particularly if you're in the business of PR. You're looking to create reports that say, how did that message land? How did that product launch go? How did that piece of communication we put into the world, how was it received? And so we've been thinking a lot about how do we apply generative AI to the business of reporting and measurement, and I'll show you some of that. And then finally, we've been prototyping and building internally a product that we call Copilot or Communications Copilot, Copilot for Communications. And we've been prototyping that over the last 9 months. I'm going to draw back the curtain a little bit and show you some of the things that we've been building and show you where we think we're going with that and hopefully inspire you to build something similar. But this is Copilot inside of Edge that I'm sure many of you have seen. So what you'll see here is I clicked on the the button in the top right-hand side, I'm looking at a PDF. This PDF is a 272-page PDF that is the European AI Act that was recently approved. I'm interested in this act because I'm sort of interested in policy and I'm interested in AI and I'm interested in technology. But I'm not going to go and read 272 pages of this document. But now with Copilot inside of the Edge browser, I can simply start to ask questions of the document. In this case, I'm saying, how long do companies have to come into compliance? How long do existing AI systems have to come into compliance with this AI Act? And it comes back and it tells me on the right-hand side that I have 4 years to come into compliance. So if you think about all of the things that we interact with on a daily basis in communications, web pages, blogs, LinkedIn pages, documents like this inside of the browser, I now constantly have this sidebar open in my browser. In fact, it's physically changed the way that I set up my workspace. In my office, I have a screen, a large monitor that's in landscape mode, and for many years I've had a second screen right next to that that's always in portrait mode. And that portrait mode screen, I'm doing this sort of odd explanation of how my desk is at work, but a landscape screen and then a portrait screen. That portrait screen I had always used as my reading screen. I would use it to read long documents, to read web pages, to read press releases, and do most of my work on my landscape screen. Now on that portrait screen, I permanently have Copilot on the screen. And I'm starting to retrain myself to say every time I read, a long story in the New York Times, or I read one yesterday in the Washington Post, and can you summarize this story for me? Give me the key takeaways. I'm starting to retrain, back to that previous slide, this notion of sort of retraining our patterns of behavior. I'm doing that both technically with the technology, but also with the way I lay out my physical space. These are some of the training, literally the prompts that we are creating internally to share with our teams, to encourage them to say, how can you go and use Copilot inside of, in this case, Teams, or Copilot inside of Word? So these are literal prompts around message testing. So if you're in the business of creating blogs, you can create a blog, and then before you publish it, you can put that draft into Teams and say, articulate the 3 key messages. If a reporter was to receive this information, a customer is to receive this information, what would be the 3 key messages that they would take away? And if they're not the messages you're aiming for, you can go and rewrite them, or you can ask Copilot to help rewrite them. You can ask Copilot to poke holes in a statement you preferred. So again, if you're in the business of PR and you're creating a proactive or a reactive statement to offer to the media, you can ask Copilot to say, tell me how would people poke holes in this particular statement? Or if you're putting communications out into the world, you can say, how might somebody disrupt this communications? How might a competitor read this particular piece of communications and attack our position, for example? Writing comms plans and blogs. Lots of our teams are doing this on a more and more regular basis. One of the things that I personally find useful is this top example here. Every Friday, I write a blog, or actually I write a LinkedIn post. If you go to my LinkedIn page, you'll see this thing that's called the Friday thing. And I've been writing it for about 17 years. Every Friday, I publish the Friday thing. And last week, it was a celebration of 404 pages, error pages on the web. But there's all kinds of things I write every Friday. But often what happens is I'll get to Friday and I'll put all of my energy into the first 3 or 4 paragraphs. And then I'll get to the end and I'll think, I really need a compelling close to this blog post, which is what it really is. And so I can highlight all of the text. I write it inside of Word. I highlight all of the text, and then I ask Copilot inside of Word to create a compelling close for me. And sometimes I use that, sometimes I adapt it, sometimes I don't use it. But it's like having a writing assistant sat alongside me all of the time. And so that's one I use quite a lot. The other thing I use for that same Friday thing, every Friday, I ask Copilot to write me a caption. So I always get stuck on what's the caption I should put on my LinkedIn post that shows up the short blurb that encourages people to click through and read the post. So now every week when I've finished my post, I'll go to Copilot and say, create me a pithy or a funny or a humorous or a serious caption that will encourage people to click on this particular post and include some emoji. And it will do that every week. So that's what you see me posting every week on LinkedIn. This is a problem everybody in this room, I am convinced, has faced at some point. The blank page problem. If you're in the business of communications, sometime in your life, you either have faced this or you will face this. And you open up Microsoft Word, which we all love, and you see this beautiful blank page. Do you know what the number one thing in the world is that people do after they've opened Microsoft Word? The number one thing people do. Anyone want to hazard a guess? No. Good guess. Yes. They close it back down. Because this is one of the most intimidating things in life. You open it up and you think, well, where do I start? And you go away and you make a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, or you go for a walk and you come back and you see the blank page and you think, well, where do I start? And I had this exact challenge a few months ago. So I was about 3 or 4 months into this new team, and I wanted to create a memo to send to the entire communications department at Microsoft. And I'm a bit more of a visual thinker. I like PowerPoint, that's my favorite tool. So I'd created a 15-slide PowerPoint deck that encompassed the strategy of my team. But I didn't really want to send everybody the deck. I wanted to send them maybe the deck and the memo. And so this is exactly what I did. This is the PowerPoint deck. You can see, I think it's 15 slides. It has a bit of text in, but it's not super text heavy. I then went into Microsoft Word, new document, and now I have Copilot. And this is literally what I typed. You can maybe not see it on the screen, but I can tell you what I typed because I make a spelling mistake somewhere along the way here. But I said, help me write a memo based on, and then I hit the / and it allows me to reference that PowerPoint slide. So help me write a memo based on comm strategy walking deck. And then I hit submit, and this is what happens. So it's gathering the information, it's combing through the information, and this is literally a video of it, not speeded up. This is real time how it happened. And then it started to write a memo. And it started to write things that were not in the PowerPoint deck, but it had understood the context of the deck. It had understood our strategies. It had understood the products and the applications that we're going to go and try and build. And so within about 45 seconds, it had created me a 1.5-page memo, or nearly a 2-page memo. Did I send this memo to the department? No. But did I throw it away? No. I took about 40%, I think, of the content of this memo. I adapted it. Anybody who would read this that knows me would read it and say, well, that's not Steve because it doesn't have enough emojis in it, and it doesn't have English spelling of American words. And so I made all of those appropriate adjustments, and then I added a few more things to it. But ultimately, it got me past the blank page problem. And I use this now again and again and again, and I would encourage you to. It's super cool. You can also do the exact opposite. You can take a Word document, or any document, in fact, and say, help me create a presentation from this file. Or if you're in PowerPoint, I imagine everyone in this room is a PowerPoint expert, but if you want to change all of the fonts across a presentation from Segoe to Segoe Semi-Bold, or from Arial to Consolas, or another font, you can do that instantly now with Copilot instead of having to go through every slide. If you want to change the theme of a presentation, you can say, hey, I want the theme of this presentation to be green. I want it to be blue, or I'd like it to be orange, my favorite color. And you could do simple things like that just speed up time, but you can do also very creative things in creating presentations in PowerPoint. Media coverage. I'll come on to this in a bit more detail when I talk about the reporting and measurement solution that we are building. But you can do lightweight media coverage using Copilot. You can issue prompts like this. What's the latest news today about Microsoft in Europe around AI? And I'll get a set of headlines back. How does that coverage compare to the coverage last week? And I will get a sort of lightweight media report. So you can do this sort of media coverage directly inside of Copilot, either on the Copilot website, or you can do it inside of Teams. Social media post inspiration is one that lots of our teams are using. A note here, I say inspiration, not creation, because that's a lot of what we're using this technology for, is not to replace our social media expertise, because we want those social media posts to be in the tone and the brand and the style and the voice of Microsoft, or in fact the many different handles that we have at Microsoft. But our teams are doing things like this. Help me write a LinkedIn post based on this blog post, or give me 5 suggested tweets based on the copy of this press release or this blog post. Make sure that those tweets are in the language of the Microsoft Life handle, for example. So social media post inspiration is something that we're taking advantage of quite a lot inside of our teams. I saw people taking photographs of those prompts. Don't worry, these slides are going to be available, so you'll be able to capture all of those. But also, if you're interested in prompting, you want to get more ideas for prompting, I would really encourage you to go to this website, Copilot Lab. It's being updated on a weekly basis, and it has a ton of great examples in here, and they're all categorized. You can say, hey, I want some prompts for creating, or I want some prompts for asking, and it will then, you can also categorize them based on product. You can say, hey, give me some great prompts that I can use inside of OneNote. I'm going to share with you 2 of my favorite prompts, the recent ones I found. The first one is inside of OneNote. So Copilot inside of OneNote. Now every Monday, I go into OneNote, I open up Copilot, and I say, create me a to-do list. and it will inspect my inbox, and it will create me a very, very good to-do list based on the content of my inbox. It's been life-changing for me. The other one that has been life-changing for me, but it's quite trivial, but I'm going to share it with you anyway. Has anybody in this room received an email that sounds a bit like this? Hello, I work for a company that creates social media messaging, video messaging, webinars. I would like to schedule a call with you for 30 minutes. Please let me know when you would like to have that call. And I probably get 20 of those messages a week. And I think what most people do with those messages is they sort of ignore them or they delete them. And sometimes they follow up on them. But lots of the time, I want to just sort of politely respond to people. Maybe it's the Britishness in me. I want to politely respond and say, hey, this isn't something I'm interested in right now. Thank you for your email, but no thanks. And so I do that. Quite often, I'll write a very polite response back to people. Thank you for emailing me. I don't have any need for this particular line of business right now, but good luck with your business. Copilot now does that for me. So I literally, now I get those messages, I hit Copilot inside of Outlook, and I say, politely decline and respond. And it will write me a perfectly lovely email. And it gives me incredible joy to just go and hit send every time. So that's one of my favorite applications of Copilot inside of Outlook. I want to switch and talk about our vision for measurement. And so that initial slide, I've sort of covered the top two parts really, how we're trying to adjust the behaviors of communicators inside of Microsoft to get them to use these products on a daily basis. Now I'm shifting to the bottom part of that opening slide around measurement and communications Copilot. This is our vision for measurement. So again, if you're in the business of communications, you're almost certainly in the business of measurement. And we spend most of our time at Microsoft, and probably people in this room, doing measurement that falls into the hindsight category. Looking backwards, how did an event go? How did a product announcement go? How did a launch go? How did a story that we were pitching to the media go? We do lots and lots of that, and that's great. That's the business that we're in, is measuring those things, sending reports to our stakeholders. How did the coverage land? What was the tone of the coverage? Was it positive, negative? So we're all probably very familiar with that sort of hindsight reporting. And it's very time-based. It's usually based on an event or an activity that's being carried out. We do some insight reporting at Microsoft as well. So occasionally we'll sort of step out of a moment in time and say, let's create a report that looks at how is our communications work competitively against Amazon or Google, or how is our work around communications on AI in the European market over the last 6 months. And so we'll do these sort of trend-based reports that fall into the insight category. We don't do any foresight work. And this is where we think AI has huge potential for us. In particular because of the very distributed and fragmented nature of the media business these days. And so let's just say I wanted to make an announcement, or Microsoft was making an announcement next week. This is fictitious, by the way. Let's say we were making an announcement next week about an educational program that we were launching in France. I'm just making things up. Normally what we would do is figure out, well, where do we want to pitch that story to? Who are the media that we should pitch that story to? And we'd probably go and pitch it to the major media outlets in France, Les Echos, or the other broadcast organizations in France. But we don't have, or I don't have, a very deep knowledge of the media landscape in France. I don't know who the creators really are. I don't know who the social media folks are. I know a little bit of the print journalism in France. My point being, it's very, very hard these days to understand the global media landscape and all of the different elements of that global media landscape. So what we would like to do is to be able to build a tool that ingests all of that global media into a system and then be able to ask questions of that system. Hey, I've got this story. I want to make this announcement in France. It's about education. And also I want to target a sort of a business decision maker audience and an educational audience. Who would be the best media to pitch that to? Those are the types of questions that we ask ourselves on a daily basis. And we think that an AI system can help us get there. And so I want to show you a product that is in development with a partner, a company called Meltwater that Microsoft has partnered with, which we announced about 6 weeks ago, that is going to bring all of this measurement and reporting and insight capability directly into the place where many of us do our work every day, and that's Microsoft Teams. And so what if I could sit inside of Microsoft Teams and ask questions like this? What are the key topics driving Microsoft's media coverage this month? And so we're in the process of building this right now, and this is how it will look. I can ask that question, and it will come back and say, these are the topics driving the coverage. This is from back in December, and so it was coverage around OpenAI and the board shuffle. And it says there was a spike in coverage on December the 2nd. I can drill into that spike in coverage, and I can see which journalists and which stories were driving the coverage. So Charles Duhigg from The New Yorker wrote a very deep piece that included coverage on it. That was part of the news cycle. Dina Bass from Bloomberg wrote, that was part of the news cycle. Paul Thurrott from Windows Central wrote, that was part of the cycle. And then I can start to drill in further and further. So I can basically start with a very broad question. What was the news coverage on Microsoft today? And I can start to get answers and have a conversation directly inside of Microsoft Teams. So this is a product that we're going to be bringing to market later this summer. We're going to be deploying it inside of Microsoft to do all of our communications and measurement work. I want to switch gears again a little bit and start to talk about this idea of a communications copilot. And so I estimate, I've been at Microsoft, as I said earlier, 26 years now. And I think I made this estimate a few months ago that in that time, I think I've probably either created or certainly presented or have on my computers somewhere in the region of 10,000 PowerPoint slides. And this slide, in fact, not this one, the next one, I think is the most popular slide I've ever created. I'm not going to tell you it's a brilliant slide, but I guarantee when I put up the next slide, people will take photographs of it. It just happens. And you don't have to if you don't want to, but people like it. But let me explain a little bit what's going on this slide. So what we are doing inside of Microsoft Communications is we are methodically going around our business of communications and saying, what are the key processes that drive our business? One of the key processes is the journey to an earned media story. How do you get a story into the media? So let's say we're trying to pitch a story about the announcement of a new product and we're trying to get it into the New York Times or the Financial Times or the Economist. This is the journey that we go on inside of Microsoft, and we've figured out it's a 20-step journey. So we come up with the idea, we sort of ideate on the idea, we brainstorm the media targets, and then we start to confirm the spokespeople, we train the spokespeople, we make the pitch to the media. Anybody who's in PR knows this process. And yours might be 22 steps, it might be 15 steps, but everybody has a very similar process. You do fact checking when the story comes out, and then you do that piece that we just talked about, you report back to stakeholders on how did the coverage go. So it's a 20-step journey inside of Microsoft. So we're going around and we're mapping all of these things. And then this is the next thing that we are doing. We're saying, where do we think we can apply AI across this process? And there are three things I would encourage you to take away from this slide. The first is the shading is quite intentional. So where there's a sort of light blue shading of AI at step 1, for example, we think there's room for probably a little bit of AI in the ideation phase. But when we get to step 4, brainstorming the media targets, as I just talked about a moment ago, we think there's a huge opportunity to use AI. So that's the first takeaway. There are different levels of AI that you can apply at different parts of this process, and I think that holds true for any of the major processes in communications. The second thing to take away is that as we studied this, we realized that there are some places where it's actually not AI that we need to apply. It's just simple automation. And so we have these steps, which I'm going to remind myself, steps 12, 13, and 15. And as we looked at them, we realized there's a huge amount of repetition and duplication in those steps. And those steps, very broadly speaking, this is what those steps are. Every time you make an announcement at Microsoft, you have to put an entry onto an internal calendar. So it goes onto a calendar to say, hey, next week we're going to make this product announcement or whatever it's going to be. So first step is you make a calendar entry. And then you go to a Microsoft form and you fill out a form. And then the next step is you have to write what we call an advisory, which is an internal communication that tells everybody in our communications department, when this announcement is made next week, here's what you need to do, or what you don't need to do. Don't amplify it, amplify this, share it with your customers, share it with the media. So that's the second step. And then the third step we have, which again is a separate form and a separate process, is that we then we do this process that we call two-factor authentication. We basically try to ensure that we are not bombarding the same journalist with 20 announcements on the same day, because that frustrates them. And so we have a process where we try to sort of deduplicate those things. Those things are 3 completely separate processes. We're in the process right now of using Power Automate to build one single simple process that uses a SharePoint list for the calendar, integrates that into Power Automate, and we estimate will cut down the time across those processes by about 80%. So we're going to have 80% of time savings through that process. But the other thing, there are 2 other things that we're going to have that will come from that automation. People will just get more joy in their job, because when you talk to people about that process, it's just tedious. They don't enjoy doing it because it's very repetitive. And so there's more joy. And then also, fairly obviously, it's going to free up time to do other things that do give them joy, or that take advantage of their creative skills or their writing. And so that's the second big takeaway. There's a ton of room for automation. And then the third takeaway is, look, there are 4 bullets on here where there's no AI, so our jobs are safe. We shouldn't be worried at all. And I say that half jokingly, but the truth is lots of the things that we are finding, whether it's AI or automation, they really are these things that are kind of either tedious or hard to do. And AI is going to help speed up that process. It's going to free us up to do more creative things. And so we are finding that again and again and again across the different systems and processes that we look at inside of communications. So now I'd like to show you a little bit of sort of inside of the curtain or behind the curtain at Microsoft. This is a website, a tool that we've been building and prototyping with, and really just prototyping with for the last 9 months. And sometimes I feel somewhat embarrassed to put this website up because it's not very sophisticated, but it does some interesting things that are teaching us how do our teams want to use AI? What are the most useful things they can get from AI? And it also shows us some of the things they don't want to do. Or it shows us actually some of these capabilities that we built 9 months ago are now directly inside of the product. So things like translation or things like transcription. We don't need to go and build those tools for our teams because they're directly inside of the products. But I'll show you a couple of things that are not, that we are building, and then I'll show you how we're going to evolve this. The first is what we call the FAQ generator. So I'm going to go down to FAQ generator, and I just have a text box here, and it says, enter some information. So I'm going out to an external website. This is the Microsoft on the Issues blog. So this is a very long blog post, about 3,000 words around our sort of policy and our position on AI. I'm going to copy the URL for that blog post, and then I'm going to paste the URL into the box, and then I'm going to put a reporter's name in, Richard Waters, who writes for the Financial Times, and then hit submit. And what you will see on the right-hand side in a second is this tool will come back and it will tell me who is Richard Waters. And it will say Richard Waters is the West Coast reporter for the Financial Times. Any second now, it's going to appear on the screen, and there it is. Richard Waters is the West Coast reporter for the Financial Times. Then it will tell me what's Richard's position being on Microsoft. Is Richard positive, neutral, or negative on Microsoft? And then most importantly, it now gives me, here are 5 questions that Richard is very likely to ask. 5 difficult questions Richard would ask if you put this information out into the world. And anybody who's in the business of PR, you look at this and you go, yes, I want that. Because we spend a lot of our time coming up with FAQs. And now I don't have to come up with at least the questions. I can spend lots of my time coming up with the answers. So this is just a simple but powerful tool that we've been prototyping and using internally to help our teams who build FAQs. The second one, earlier I mentioned social media post inspiration. Exactly the same thing. So I go to this website, I'm going to copy the URL, come back to Communications Copilot, and I paste in the URL, hit submit, and then what we'll see on the right-hand side in a moment is it will give us a suggested Twitter post or an X post, whatever we call those things these days, some suggested LinkedIn copy based on the content of this website, and then some suggested AI images that I could use. And so you can see that it does that. It includes the hashtags. What's going on in the background is that we're not just sending this off to a simple prompt and saying, hey, give me a social media post. We're saying, give me a social media post in the style and the tone of Microsoft on LinkedIn, and please include some hashtags, and please include a link to the story. And so we're packaging up what is not a massively sophisticated prompt, but it is a more managed prompt, if you like, to ensure that everybody who's using it for social media post inspiration is getting the benefits of that sort of additional information that's wrapped around the prompt. And then the final one in this suite of tools that we have, this is my personal favorite, is the YouTube transcript summarizer. So similar kind of layout. I'm going to go to an external website. This time it's out to YouTube. I'm going to take this keynote. Jensen Huang from NVIDIA, the CEO of NVIDIA, back in March, gave a 2-hour keynote. I would love to watch that 2-hour keynote from Jensen, but I just don't have the 2 hours in my day. In fact, I would like to watch most keynotes in technology, whether it's our competitors or other sessions that are here today, but I don't have the time, I don't have the ability to be in multiple different places. So I put the URL into this website and I've clicked submit. And now what it's done very quickly is it's transcribed a 2-hour keynote for me. But even more, I can now start to ask questions of that transcript. So I can say, what did Jensen talk about in the transcript? Or in the keynote rather, did he talk about customers? What were the key technologies that he talked about? So I can start to, in a way, have a conversation, if you like, with a keynote. And so where are we taking this? Well, where we are taking it is where I think you would hope we would take it. Is it's all very well to have this on a website, but our teams have to remember to keep going to that website to use this tool. So what we're now trying to build, and in the process of building in my team, is basically this interface. And so it directly inside of Teams, 3 different types of things we're going to enable people to do. The first one is report. And so that's the work that we're doing with Meltwater that I showed you a few moments ago. The ability to say, what are today's headlines on, or build me a report on, or do some analysis around a particular topic. I'll be able to do that directly inside of Teams. Over on the right-hand side, what we're really doing here is using generative AI and Copilot to reason over all of the SharePoint sites that we have inside of our department. And so like you, I'm sure you have lots of different SharePoint sites, and in the business of PR, on those sites, we have things like approved statements or approved messaging or a Q&A or a narrative around all kinds of different topics. But if I very quickly need an answer to a question, I have to remember which website to go to. I have to find the most recent document. I have to scroll through that long document and find the statement. So now we're just going to create this single interface that allows us to reason over all of that information and just ask questions of those documents. Similarly, on SharePoint, we built an internal database of the expertise in our department. So if I want to find who's an expert on Microsoft Healthcare, who's an expert on quantum computing, who's an expert on IoT, who's an expert on SharePoint, or I can say who is the person that leads Microsoft Communications in India or the communications team in Latin America, I can quickly get answers to those questions just by layering on top of this generative AI interface on top of our sort of SharePoint database of expertise. And then the final one on here is the calendar that I mentioned earlier on. Our entire PR calendar is built inside of SharePoint. But if I want to figure out what's on the calendar next Thursday, or are there any tier 1 announcements coming up over the next month, I have to go to the calendar and figure that out myself manually. But now we'll be able to go to a simple interface inside of Teams and say, hey, tell me all of the tier 1 events that are in Europe over the next 3 weeks on our calendar, and I'll instantly get a response. And then in the middle is this section, some of the things that I just showed you. We're going to take them from that website and build them into a Teams-based interface. So help me build a social media post, help me build an FAQ document, help me write a press release. We can put all of those directly inside of Teams. And so I've not shown anyone this before, so you're the first audience to see this, and hopefully you can see it, but this morning we talked in the keynote about Copilot Studio, and this is exactly what we are using. So we're using our own products to build this solution. So this is our early prototype of literally, you can see the bottom left in a very rudimentary way, that is the interface that you just saw on the previous page. It's the 3 different categories of things in a 3x3 matrix. And so in this case, I'm doing the social media post, taking that same URL, I'm testing this through the Copilot Studio interface, I put the URL and it will give me back a LinkedIn blog post. Or it will give me back, a Twitter post, and then it will say, would you like me to also give you a LinkedIn post? And so we're using the same technology that you saw this morning in the keynote, literally to build what we are calling Communications Copilot. And I hope at some point we're going to be able to share some of that publicly with all of you. That's the path I'm on, is to try and say, hey, we're going to go build it, and then we just want to share it with folks in this room and other people. So more to come on that, I hope. So I want to wrap up, and I think we'll have a little bit of time for questions if people do have them, and sort of close with answering questions that I often get. What should we do as communicators in this new era of AI? And there are 4 pieces of advice that I offer to people. The first is to do exactly what we are doing. Experiment, pioneer, play around, share prompts, get out there, not just Microsoft technology, hopefully often Microsoft technology, but there's lots of fascinating generative AI technology out there, and it's coming out very quick. And don't be left behind. Get out there and experiment and pioneer. And operate, as I'm sort of conveying here, operate with a sense of urgency, that the landscape is moving incredibly quickly. We often in this industry talk about, well, I've never seen something that's moved quite as fast as this, but I genuinely haven't seen things move quite as fast as this in terms of the capabilities, from where we were with GPT-3 and GPT 3.5 16 months ago to where we are now with GPT-4 Turbo and image integration. So it's moving very, very quickly. So there is a real sense of urgency here. The third one, I think, for communicators and particularly for leaders in this room is to not lose sight of the value of the work that we do. That AI can do many things, but it can't convey the values of your company. It can't deliver emotional storytelling. It can't do crisis communications. It can't do breaking news just by virtue of the way the technology works. So there is lots of things that AI simply cannot do and will never be able to do in our profession. AI is never going to really do great, compelling, emotive storytelling. And I hope that's something that people in this room cherish, that we can all hold on to and remind others in our profession who, maybe are a bit nervous or anxious about this technology to say, no, this technology is here to help us. It's here to replace some of the things we don't like doing and actually give us time back to do a lot of the things that we do like doing, like creative communications or strategic communications. And then finally, I do think culture is key. I talked about this at the start around a lot of the work in my team is really not around the technology. It's around how do we get people to change behaviors? How do we get people to just little by little change their patterns of work? And my advice has been pick one product per week. Say, right, this week I'm going to focus on using Copilot inside of Outlook. Next week I'm going to focus on using Copilot inside of Word. So, pick an application or pick a focus area. And that really, I think, is the key to sort of driving the culture change that we need. Two final things I'll leave you with. One is a reminder to download Copilot onto your mobile device. It's a fantastic app. I will give you my favorite use of this. It's a non-business use. My favorite use of this application is I woke up, and I did this 3 weeks ago. I walked up to the fridge in my house, the refrigerator, opened the refrigerator door, took a photograph of the contents of the fridge, and then asked Copilot, what can I make with the ingredients? And it looked at the image and it said, you have a squash and you have some eggs and you've got some milk and you've got some other things in here. You could make a really nice butternut squash soup. And then it gave me the recipe and how to make the soup. I didn't in fact make the soup, spoiler alert, but my kids were super impressed with it. They thought that was an amazing use of the technology, but I really would encourage people to use it. I use this probably 15 or 20 times a day now, just to answer questions, to get quick advice I need. And it gives me answers versus giving me 10 blue links. And then the final thing I'll leave you with is encourage you to download this publication that we produced, Microsoft produced with the University of Southern California, the Annenberg School of Journalism and PR, back in December last year. And it contains 30 different essays from lots of different folks across the communications business. Some people from Microsoft are in there, my boss is in there, there's an essay from me in there, but there are essays in there from people who run agencies, there are essays in there from folks who are in academia, there are essays in there from people who are much more steeped in the technology side of things. So it's a freely downloadable PDF. I think it's a really great and a very digestible read, and I'd encourage you to go and download it. And with that, I am going to finish, and we have, if people do want to stick around, we've got a mic here, and we can take some questions. If you do have a question, feel free to raise your hand. If you don't, you're welcome to leave, and I will just say thank you for your time and attendance. I really appreciate it.
Hi, Steve.
Hello.
Thanks for the session.
You're welcome.
What do you think happens in 2026? So AI is generating AI and learning from AI, and communication is generating text with AI. Is it the future that we read text which is all pre-generated? When do we lose the human factor?
Well, I can't predict what's going to happen in 2026, but I understand the question around, are we heading towards this dystopian world where everything is generated by AI and everything that AI consumes is generated by AI, and you're in this downward spiral? And all I can say is I think and I hope the answer is no. And I think it's up to us, and it's up to us supporting, when I say us, Microsoft, it's up to us supporting media organizations, for example, which we do a lot of, how we're actually trying to help rebuild the media industry in particular here in the US with investments we're making around how do we get great journalism back? How do we support great journalism? How do we keep that business going? And so I think I don't have a technological answer to it, because there is certainly elements of that can and will happen around AI-generated content fueling AI. But I think it's up to us to protect the profession and to cherish it and to sort of nurture the profession of communications.
Hi, thank you. My question is, how do you, help maintain like a sense of sincerity and trust with the public when we, generate all these communications?
I think it really comes down to, there's two ways I'll answer that question. One is around trust. And so let me talk about that for a moment. I didn't talk about it in this session, but there's a lot of emphasis and focus at Microsoft, not just in communications, but in how we build our products around responsible AI. And in fact, 7 years ago, we set up a group inside of the company that back then was relatively small. I think it was less than 10 people, and it's now over 350 people. And their entire job is to ensure that we are building technology in a responsible, trustworthy, transparent, accountable way. So much so that I think it was about 4 years ago, we released a set of AI principles, the responsible AI principles, and everybody who's a product builder in Microsoft has to adhere to those principles. So when a product gets released, it has to go through a responsible AI council that checks that it is, it has been engineered appropriately to use AI. And about 2 years ago, we released those principles publicly, so they're publicly available to anybody else who wants to apply them to their business. So there's a very big focus around responsibly building AI. And then I guess the next step is around, it's less about AI, but I think for us, certainly for me, it's much more about the values of the company. Is, what values do we have as a company? And, we need to trust and support and cherish those values and make sure that we uphold those values. And so it's not something that I would say we have a lot of focus on from an AI point of view, but I think we have a focus on just broadly from certainly a communications point of view around, is everything that we are saying and that we are doing, is it trustworthy? Does it accrue to our values? Is it aligned with our brand and our mission as a company? And Jeff, right at the start of the keynote today, talked about the mission of the company. And having worked on that mission statement back when we announced it about 9.5 years ago, it really sort of changed the way our company worked in everything that we did. And it sounds very pithy and easy to say that, but it truly did. I would say, lots of decisions, big and small, inside of our company are made with that mission in mind. Is this truly empowering everybody? Is this for everybody on the planet or just for a small set of people on the planet? And so that sort of ethos and philosophy, I think, just drives a lot of what we do at the company. And I think that has expanded into AI over the last 9 months as we've really started to put this into our products. So I hope that answers your question.
Hi, thank you very much. I downloaded the app, by the way.
Excellent.
My name is Dave
I should have
Buckley. I'm a
checked
personal
everybody on
injury
the way
attorney.
out.
Say that again?
I should have checked everyone on the way out to make sure they downloaded the app.
My name is Dave Buckley. I'm a personal injury attorney from New Hampshire. I've been practicing for 35 years. After someone is done treating, I draft a demand. I've drafted these demands for 30 plus years. I have a particular writing style. They all contain the same set of information, the narrative of how the incident occurred, information drawn from the police reports, information drawn from medical records, medical billing, and it's time consuming. I am the bottleneck in my practice when it comes time to that demand going out because I'm the one sitting down drafting this. My question is, can I take a select number of demands I've drafted, 20 or 30, plug it into the AI, tell AI this is my writing style, and repeat it, and then upload, for instance, a particular case, a police record, medical records, medical billing, and have the Copilot draft my demand in my style. And then I have another follow-up question if I can.
So the answer to that is yes. Like, quite simply, it's yes. And there are multiple different ways you can do it. When this AI stuff first came out, we had lots of scenarios where we were thinking just like that. And so the scenario is, hey, I have a set of content, and I would like to basically have an AI system be trained to use that content to help me generate new content in my style. I think that's the essence of your question. And when, even 9 months ago, and this makes my point around how quickly things have changed. 9 months ago, the common wisdom on how to do that would have been to take those documents and to train your own so-called large language model. But even if you had 10,000 documents, that wouldn't really constitute a large language model, because these large language models have hundreds of millions of essentially documents in there. And so what evolved over the last, I would say, 6 months is this approach, and again, I think Jeff mentioned it in the keynote this morning, this approach called RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation. And very simply, what that means is when I showed you the example inside of Microsoft Word earlier, where I say, hey, help me write a memo based on this PowerPoint slide, it's basically that. So imagine you took all of those documents, just for argument's sake, you took the 100 documents that you want, and you just put them into one single document. You just end-to-end a single document. You could do exactly that inside of Word today. You could say, hey, here is a new case that I have. Please write me a write-up of this or a synopsis based on this other content. So you're basically just saying, write in my style, and my style is over here in this set of documents. So that's sort of a long answer, but the short answer is yes, and it's getting easier and easier and easier to do it.
Thank you. My follow-up question is medical records, medical billing, that's confidential information. And I'm uploading it to God knows where. And what concerns should I have about the privacy and confidentiality of those personal records?
You should definitely have concerns around it. And I like the way that you're saying, to God knows anywhere. And, the point I made earlier is there are lots of these tools and technology out there, lots of different providers, lots of different things. And again, as Jeff said this morning in the keynote, I think this is incredibly important. Anything that you have that's inside of Microsoft 365, it's yours. Microsoft doesn't get to see it. It doesn't get to train any kind of future model. OpenAI doesn't get to see it. So all I can do is stand here and say, if your information is inside of M365, which is inside of the Microsoft cloud, it's yours. It's secure. Nobody else gets to see it.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hello, my name is Sascha Friedrich. I have a question to you regarding, you talked about communication Copilot 2.0. Is that something you see also for, you talked about different newspaper publisher companies, that it's also a good framework for them or a blueprint they can use? You present small snapshots, I think.
Well, first of all, Sasha, it's nice to see you. And I didn't realize that was you, so hello. And a couple of things I'll say on Communications Copilot is my ambition is that we can take that and we can make it available, whether that is a paid product or freely downloadable or templates. We're sort of working through that a little bit at the moment, but I'm optimistic that we'll be able to, sort of give the ideas around Communications Copilot, give them away to some extent. I'm not sure I fully understood the question, but in terms of other publishers and media using this, there are already examples of that. So just last week, for example, the Financial Times, they have adopted our technology to create think of it as kind of a bot, a co-pilot for the Financial Times, where you can start to conversationally sort of interrogate and read the Financial Times and the whole sort of back catalog of that. So that's one example of an organization that's doing this kind of stuff.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, this is Fred from Atlantic Health System. We were talking about security, and some other gentleman had concerns about personal information, PHI. And we know that what we've been told is when you put in a prompt, you get a response. Everything stays
Hold the mic a bit.
on your tenant.
Hold the mic.
Everything stays on your tenant. Nothing gets leaked out. So I'm curious. I notice when Copilot gives you a response, there are two buttons on the bottom, like and dislike. When a user clicks on one of those buttons, exactly what's being captured and where does it go?
That is a good question that I don't know the answer to. And so I could make an educated guess at that, but I'm not going to. So we'll get your information and get you an answer. But I can still say I'm extremely confident, and Dan, if you know the answer, you should offer the answer. But I'm extremely confident that even if you hit those buttons, it's not taking the information and saying we're going to put this back somewhere else into Microsoft Cloud. So I'll take my shot at it. I think what it's saying is, was the quality of this generative response good or bad?
And that would be it. Nothing, no prompt, no response gets stored or sent to Microsoft.
This man here is shaking his head, so he's a Microsoft employee.
Okay.
Absolutely no prompts or information from within the boundary of your M365 tenant leaves or is seen by Microsoft. And so it would make our jobs a lot easier if we could, but that's absolutely not part of what Microsoft does.
Any other questions?
I actually don't know whether, maybe someone in the room remembers, I don't know whether those up and down thumb buttons actually exist in M365 Copilot. I know they exist in Copilot on the web, but that's on the web, you're on the web. But inside of M365, I'm not even sure they do, okay.
Did you have a question, sir?
Here, I'll run the mic over for you.
My question is about, so say you're using Copilot to parse some information in SharePoint, and we already have some, sensitive information that we've kind of used security groups to protect. Will Copilot?
Yes. Copilot respects all of the security provisions that are already in place. All of your sort of
So it won't bring back to the rest of the staff that information.
yeah, you can't go to the HR Copilot and say, "Hey, tell me the salaries of everyone in the company." It's not gonna do that for you.
Okay.
Like that's a funny example, but no, it absolutely. And we've tested this in the products that my team is building, and it absolutely works. And so you only get to see what you're allowed to see through a normal interface. Copilot's not getting around that in any kind of way. Okay, well, I'm going to wrap us up there. Thank you for sticking to the end. Thanks for the questions. Thank you for coming, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you so much, Steve.